Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this is the healthiest half hour anywhere online today. Appreciate you joining us right here on Facebook and on YouTube as we do our best to educate, entertain, and inspire for the next half hour. On tap today, why is it that so many COVID-19 patients are obese? Well, new research is showing that a single hormone may hold the answer. And to discuss and talk all about this is the one and only Dr. Hana Kahleova. Dr. Kahleova, this is some very promising research. Looking forward to diving into it with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Chuck.
And could doctors have been missing the mark on how to treat obesity as obesity rates continue to explode? It's a fair question to ask. And now new guidelines would overhaul the treatment process in hopes of ending this obesity epidemic. So what could be done differently? For that, we're going to welcome Dr. Vanita Rahman to the Exam Room Live. Important topic here, Dr. Rahman. Cannot wait to discuss this one with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah, something you and I know very well together. And send in your questions for the good doctor because we will be opening up the doctor's mailbag. She'll be prescribing an answer with what is on your mind. So we'll get some answers, raise our nutrition IQs, but we need for you to send in your question right now in the comments section, or you can tweet them to us using the hashtag ExamRoomPodcast. But first, before we go any further, let's get caught up on the latest happenings. Here are your health headlines for Tuesday, August 4th, 2020. And we do start with a look at the coronavirus by the numbers, as nearly 50,000 new cases and more than 500 deaths were reported Monday, marching the total since the beginning of the pandemic beyond 4.7 million infections and 155,000 fatalities here in the U.S., while Southern Belt states such as Florida, Mississippi, and Alabama continue to lead the country in new infections. Health officials are now noticing an uptick in Midwestern states where caseloads had remained relatively stable. Those states include Missouri, Montana, and Oklahoma. This as 26 states and Puerto Rico have seen an increase in the number of deaths over the last 2 weeks. Meanwhile, there is new evidence today that the coronavirus is mutating. Researchers in Italy say they have identified at least 6 unique strains of SARS-CoV-2, and that is the virus that causes COVID-19. But they say the strains are similar and mutating slowly, and that is good news for the prospects of developing an efficient vaccine. For comparison, the virus responsible for the common flu generally mutates at about double that speed, according to researchers. The study's authors also say one strain in particular appears to be the most dominant. Nearly 50,000 coronavirus genomes from around the world were analyzed for the study that is published in the journal Frontiers in Microbiology. And when you think about diabetes, you probably think about sugar. But new research is showing that we should also be keeping a closer eye on salt. In a study of more than 900 adults with diabetes, just 7% kept their sodium intake below the recommended daily limit. And some now are questioning whether health officials should be working more closely with food companies to reduce the amount of sodium in foods rather than putting the onus exclusively on the patient. The study published in Nutrient and Diabetes also finds similar issues with potassium, and researchers say lowering both levels would improve cardiovascular health in people with diabetes. And finally, at a time when the global pandemic is wreaking havoc on the economy, business leaders in Latin America and the Caribbean say a shift toward plant-based agriculture in the region could create more than 22 million jobs over the next decade. The report states that would be more than enough to offset the 7.5 million that would be lost if production methods shift away from current animal agriculture and toward a net zero carbon economy. Interesting. Moving on, millions have contracted the coronavirus around the world, and early on it became apparent that the risk of severe infection increases if the patient has hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, and other diet-related chronic conditions. And most of those conditions can be tied directly back to obesity. And because of that, the majority of patients had at least one of those comorbidities. And now researchers are working to find out exactly why obesity is so common among COVID-19 patients. And they appear to be zeroing in on a single hormone that may be the key to it all. To discuss these findings, we welcome Dr. Hana Kahleova to the exam room live. She is the Director of Clinical Research here at the Physicians Committee. Dr. Kahleova, this is pretty interesting. So what hormone are we talking about here?
Hi, Chuck. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to share this research paper with you. Let me share my screen so that I can show you my presentation. And let's start the presentation. Can you see the slides?
I got it. I got it loud and clear. Yes, ma'am.
So the hormone that we're talking about, that's the link between obesity and COVID-19, is called leptin. We've known for quite some time that excess body weight increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high blood lipids, sleep apnea, and some cancers. But in addition, it's been also linked to a higher risk of catching viral infections, including COVID-19, and of developing its complications. And the common link to all these conditions seems to be leptin. Leptin is a hormone. This is the paper that has just been published, and you are able to download it online for free if you're interested. Let me just give you a brief summary. Leptin is a hormone that's secreted by our fat cells. So the more fat we have, the more leptin our body is secreting. The more factories, the more fat cells are there to secrete leptin. And leptin regulates our appetite and metabolism through signaling in the hypothalamus in our brain. And the name leptin comes from a Greek word, leptos, which means thin. Leptin is a hormone that's designed to keep us thin, that's designed to decrease food intake and increase energy expenditure. Unfortunately, overweight people have high leptin levels because they have so many fat cells. And these elevated leptin levels result in leptin resistance, where their cells are not responding to leptin that well. And the result is increased hunger and food intake, systemic inflammation, insulin resistance, and elevated blood sugar. So pre-diabetes and diabetes are the complications of elevated levels of leptin and leptin resistance. And interestingly, leptin has also profound effects on our immune system. It regulates how our T helper cells, some of our immune cells, are being transformed. And leptin helps induce the T cells into the Th1 subtype, which has more pro-inflammatory response than Th2 that has mainly regulatory functions. And some viruses, including the coronavirus, are able to suppress the production of interferons, the antiviral defense system. The viral particles are in pentagons here. So this is the coronavirus suppressing the production of the antiviral interferons. And now if we have too high levels of leptin, that will further suppress our immune function and unfortunately will promote inflammation. So what's the way out? How can we break this vicious cycle? Any thoughts?
I mean, I'm going to leave this one up to you because you are the expert. In the past, I will say that when I've taken a stab at these things, I'm right about 3/4 of the time. But I want to make sure that you hit the nail on the head for 100% for us here.
So obviously, we know that leptin is produced in the fat cells. So we need to, if we have extra weight, we need to shed those extra pounds. But specifically, we need to lose fat. We don't need to lose muscle. We need to shed those pounds in the form of fat. And now many people think, well, I really struggle with some extra pounds and maybe a keto diet would help. So if you're thinking about doing a keto diet for weight loss, I would like to ask you to think twice. I'd like to share with you a brand new research conducted by Dr. Kevin Hall at NIH. And this was a study that was comparing a keto diet and a plant-based diet. Now, the participants were 20 overweight adults, and they came to a metabolic ward where they were receiving all their meals. And they tried both diets in a random order for 2 weeks each. Now, the keto diet was very much animal-based, a lot of meat and cheese, and contained 60% of calories in the form of fat and only 10% of carbohydrates. In contrast, the plant-based diet was very low in fat. It contained only 10% of calories in the form of fat, and the most of it were carbohydrates. 75% of calories were coming from carbohydrates. Now, people were losing weight on both diets. And what's intriguing, that on a keto diet, the weight loss was more pronounced. People were losing 4 pounds on a keto diet compared with 2.4 pounds on a plant-based diet. But now, let me share this. While there was a bigger weight loss on a keto diet, only a small percentage was really coming from the fat loss. You can see that fat mass didn't actually change during the first week, and these confidence intervals overlap. So there was a trend toward a decrease, but it was not significant. So in other words, fat mass didn't change significantly on the keto diet, while it decreased significantly on the plant-based diet. So on a plant-based diet, the majority of the weight loss was due to fat loss, while on the keto diet, the majority of the weight loss was due to the muscle mass loss. Do you want to lose muscle? Of course not. This is something that we want to preserve. In addition to this difference, the researchers were also tracking the energy intake of all the participants, and they found out that even though the participants were able to eat as much as they wanted from, with the specific composition of the diet, the participants were decreasing their caloric intake by almost 700 kilocalories per day without counting calories, with the same amounts of rating for hunger and appetite between the diets. In other words, on a plant-based diet, without even thinking about it, they were eating less calories, which sets them up for success for the future weight loss. And just to bring it home, most of the weight loss on a plant-based diet was due to fat loss, which reduces the leptin levels, in contrast to losing muscle, which doesn't do anything to your leptin levels. And what's also interesting, even if you're kind of thin or if you don't need to lose weight so much, a plant-based diet has been shown to increase leptin levels even without weight loss. Researchers at Harvard University were looking at the healthy plant-based eating index and the leptin levels, and they found out that women in the nurses' health study who were consuming a lot of plant foods and had a high healthy plant-based index, that means they were eating a lot of whole grains and legumes and fruits and vegetables, they had also high leptin levels, higher than the women who had a low index. Now, if you're thin, then higher leptin levels are something that's really good for you. if you overdo it, if you are overweight or obese and are producing too much of leptin, then you need to reduce the levels. So a plant-based diet will help you with your weight loss, specifically with your fat loss. But even if you don't need any weight loss, then a healthy plant-based diet will help you with your leptin levels that will be healthy, and will also be a good stimulus for your immune system and protect you against viral infections, including COVID-19.
All right, interesting stuff. I always love it when you come on the show because you come so science heavy. Like I feel like it really is like being in school. And so today you are Dr. Professor Kahleova. That's amazing. A question from a viewer by the name of Dora. She wants to know, isn't it correct that fat cells don't go away when people lose weight? I read that they just shrink. She read this at the Mayo Clinic.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. We have a certain amount of fat cells. They can shrink. Once they shrink, they also produce less leptin. It's about the volume of the cells, about their capacity to produce leptin. We can also do something to induce new fat cells. Previously, we thought that there's only a certain amount of fat cells that we have, and there's nothing we can do about it, and we cannot grow any further. It turned out not to be true. Even adults can grow new fat cells, and the fat cells can also diminish. But you are completely right. In the initial stages of weight loss, you are just shrinking the volume of your fat cells. But that also results in reductions of your leptin levels.
Very interesting. All right, Dr. Kahleova, appreciate you. Oh, by the way, coming up this Thursday, the International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine begins. And I know that you're going to be speaking, I believe, on Friday. What's your presentation on this year?
So first of all, also Kevin Hall from NIH will be presenting this study and also other studies. So for those of you who are interested, he will be speaking as well. And my presentation on Friday will be on which diet is best for our cardiometabolic health. We will be comparing, some of the popular diets. Is it the Mediterranean diet or is it the Nordic diet? Well, stay tuned and sign in on Friday.
I mean, I could hazard a guess right now, but I don't want to reveal any spoilers. So here's the exciting thing right now for Exam Room Live viewers. You can get 20% off the cost of registration if you head over to pcrm.org/ICNM. Click on the registration button. And when you do, just enter the promo code EXAM and then the number 20, lowercase exam 20 for 20% off the cost of registration. Everything begins this Thursday, so mark your calendars, and runs for 3 days. I mean, listen to this lineup, right? This is Dr. Kahleova. This lineup is just incredible. Dr. Michael Greger will be there. He's going to be speaking about evidence-based weight loss. Dr. Neil Barnard, he's going to be there teaming up with Dr. Christy Cobb. They're going to be speaking about nutrition and sex hormones. And then Drs. Walter Willett and David Katz, they're going to be speaking on Friday as well. They're going to be giving a talk called What's Behind Nutrition Controversies and Making Sense of the Science. God knows we need some clarity on a lot of things. And then how, you can't also forget other people who are going to be there. Dr. Kim Williams, phenomenal human being. He's going to be there. And then there will also be a series of lectures on culinary medicine. And that's really just the beginning of things. It's 3 days, the likes of which you have never experienced. And for the first time ever, Dr. Kahleova, completely online. So very much looking forward to your presentation on Friday. Again, if you want to register, head over to pcrm.org/ICNM and enter the promo code EXAM20 for 20% off the cost of registration. Can't wait to see you there, Dr. Kahleova. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Chuck, and I hope to see you all online on Thursday and on Friday during our conference.
All right, we will talk to you soon. Changing gears now, let's talk about another aspect of the worldwide crisis, Obesity. It is indeed a global epidemic, and to date, we are losing the battle of the bulge. And that is why leading physicians in Canada want to take another approach in the war on the waistline, and one that addresses the root cause of obesity and not squarely putting the focus on losing weight alone. The 5-part guidelines address the stigma of being overweight, both from a patient and a physician perspective, including challenging doctors not to let their own weight bias interfere with treatment. The recommendations also include assessing the patient's story, why they're overweight, and not just assuming that it's because they're lazy. We're talking about some psychological interventions too, really overhauling it as we know it now. And I want to welcome Dr. Vanita Rahman to the Exam Room Live to talk about these new proposed guidelines out of Canada. This is really interesting. And just from experience, my own experience, I wanted to bring you in because I think that with a lot of these things, they're really hitting the nail on the head. We talk about preventative medicine and treating the cause and not the symptom. And now they're talking about honing in to do the same thing just for obesity. To me, that seems to be the key to winning this war long term.
Yeah, it's such an important topic. And these guidelines are issued because there is an obesity crisis in the world. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, we had an obesity pandemic. And so we need to not lose sight of that. But the guidelines really talk about several things, Chuck. First, they talk about the bias that you just mentioned, that there's bias on both sides. There's bias from healthcare providers whose biases may play a role in how they assess and help their patients. So they really encourage us as healthcare providers to be mindful of that and check that at the door and really focus on the patient. And then the other thing they point out, this is really startling to me, is that they say that just the stigma associated with obesity leads to increased morbidity, in other words, complications and mortality, independent of the weight alone, that it isn't just the weight, but the stigma that goes with it, the psychosocial impact of it also plays a key role. So really addressing that is important. And going along with that, something they recommend is, often as healthcare providers, we may just make assumptions that someone is ready to talk about their weight loss struggles and they're ready to hear our advice. But they tell us that it's important to get a patient's permission. Can we talk about your weight? Or would you like to discuss your weight today? Just like we do with anything else, like asthma or allergies, we don't just write a prescription, we talk to them first. So really talking to our patients, seeing if they're ready for this conversation, and then proceeding from there is key.
It absolutely is key. And to me, I think that I wish more people would view food in the same light as they do other addictive substances, right? Mm-hmm. Because it truly is, especially among the super morbidly obese. And clearly, I think that the rate of obesity and super obesity, as we see it, also speaks to that as well. But we need to talk to people and ask them if indeed they are ready to address it. Because if they're not, if you ask them and they say no, then just stop the conversation right there. Because just like any other addiction, if they're not ready to change, mm-hmm. change absolutely positively cannot occur. The person has to be willing to change themselves. And I think that maybe for physicians, not knowing that and then speaking to the patients and just saying, hey, you got to lose weight, it can be so frustrating because they're missing that addictive component to it. I would imagine that can be frustrating from a physician standpoint.
Yeah, sometimes we're so used to just telling people what to do. Take this blood pressure medicine, take this insulin, take this inhaler, eat less, exercise more. It's an easy ask, but it's really tough for someone else to do. It's easy for me to say it, but I'm not in that patient's shoes. I'm not experiencing what they are. So it's really important to appreciate that and to really empathize with where they're coming from, so we can meet them there. And then the treatment is that much more effective.
Yeah. And you mentioned the psychosocial aspect of things as well. And to me, that just speaks of depression. And if a person is depressed, mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that also brings on a whole other set of health complications like you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Depression can impair one from sleeping, from taking care of themselves, from doing the things they know they need to do, but they just can't get themselves to do it. So it's really important to address it. And this is one of the things that the guidelines do recommend is that, we incorporate behavioral therapy and psychosocial therapy into all of this. And there are approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy. So let's say someone has food addiction or they have emotional eating issues, really referring them to a professional who can help them with that is so important, because if we don't address that underlying cause, it's going to be hard for them to just change things for themselves.
And these guidelines, which are being proposed from a group in Canada, I also thought that it was really critical. Let me pull this up right here. They also talk about speaking with the patient about overcoming the barriers that have to date prevented them from losing weight and then certainly keeping it off. So the barriers that are there, and talking about, just perhaps even something as a lack of access to quality healthcare, that too can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to healthy foods, lack of support, all these things. There are so many challenges people face, and it's important to appreciate that and then to work with our patients to tackle them. So this is really important. And the guidelines are really trying to be holistic in that they're approaching it from all angles. It's not just a simple eat less, exercise more message. It's about, let's talk about why you are where you are and how can we help you break that cycle.
I'm glad that you brought up healthy food here. Obviously, that's key to losing it and keeping it off long term. That's why I'm a big proponent of a plant-based diet, even though I didn't lose the weight exclusively through a plant-based diet. Keeping it off, plant-based diet, I give 100% credit to. Now, my question is, in terms of what type of dietary approach this group is recommending, what are they saying, and is there room for improvement as far as those guidelines in terms of the nutrition they're discussing?
Yeah, absolutely, Chuck. So really important questions there. They get a lot of things right in terms of, first of all, addressing the problem, addressing some of the factors that play into the problem. But then when they go on to make specific recommendations about possible dietary or surgical treatments, I think, that's where they miss a key opportunity to really talk about the benefits of plant-based diets. For example, the group recommends trying OptiFast or Nutrisystem or Weight Watchers. And we know these commercial diet plans have temporary success rates, but they don't have long-term success rates. And often they may not improve the underlying conditions that come along with being overweight. So, I think this is where they really missed a key opportunity, because they talk about evidence-based recommendations. And when we're talking about evidence, we have really strong evidence that plant-based diets help people lose weight. For example, in the BROAD study in New Zealand, patients lost an average of 25 pounds. In the Lifestyle Heart study, patients lost an average of 22 pounds. So we have these very strong studies, and unfortunately, the group does not recommend looking at low-fat plant-based diets. And I think that was a real opportunity that they missed to recommend something that could have helped so many people.
And that's kind of surprising when you look at the dietary guidelines in Canada shifting more and more toward the adoption of a plant-based diet. So I am a little bit surprised that that was not mentioned in these guidelines, but nonetheless, that's kind of the importance of what it is we do here at the Physicians Committee and this show. I mean, it's like taking something that's good and then taking it to the next level. You hear me talk a lot about next level nutrition, and I think that that's exactly what it is that you and I are talking about right here. Before we put a bow on this thing and wrap it up, can you talk about some of the successes you've had in working with patients who really have struggled to lose the weight, and then maybe you've been able to work with them and identify the cause of that weight and get them over that barrier, get them over that hurdle, and then finally step into that healthier body that they've always wanted?
Yeah, well, so many patients I've worked with, but what I find most helpful for patients is really doing this in a group setting. And this is something the guidelines actually acknowledge also, that group-based programs can be highly effective because for two reasons. One, they can help the the patient and the healthcare provider understand what's the root cause, and then they can help both address it in a group setting, which is so much more effective. So if someone is struggling with emotional eating, for instance, it's hard to deal with it in isolation, but once they're in a group setting and they're working with others and they see others and they hear how they tackled it, what worked for them, then that can be really empowering. And I've seen patients lose up to 50 pounds in a group setting where they're able to eat a low-fat plant-based diet. They are able to really turn their health around. I had a gentleman who started a program with me because he needed to have knee replacement because he had end-stage osteoarthritis from years of being overweight, but his surgeon couldn't do the surgery because of the weight. He had to lose the weight. So we worked together to help him get to his goal weight. And it was the group dynamic that really helped him, knowing how to troubleshoot things that come up on a daily basis.
And the group dynamic really helped me at first too, seeing the same faces week in and week out. It kind of almost got to be a competition of sorts of, who was doing the best and, that particular week. But it was also really great to be able to share what worked and what didn't work and get ideas to, help ourselves along together. And just having that accountability was absolutely key. Before we wrap things up, I want to share some comments by a person by the name of My Imaginations UK and get your thoughts on this. They say, I asked my doctor to help me with my weight loss, and she sent me to a dietitian that told me what a portion of fries should be, and then freaked out when I said I didn't eat red meat. I was so frustrated. I still have a way to go, not quite there yet. But anyway, she said that they basically found forks over knives and lost 30 pounds on their own. So, I mean, what do you do as a patient when you go to a doctor or a dietitian and you have such a deflating conversation?
Mm-hmm.
How is it that a patient can stay motivated to make these changes when you're getting a message that is so counterintuitive to what it is that you need to do?
Yeah, and this is a common scenario, and it's actually something that the guidelines also address, that we need to educate the healthcare providers about medical nutrition therapy. And there's such a gap in nutrition education across all healthcare providers. So when this happens, my recommendation is, you have a right to express how you feel. You should share openly with that dietitian or a physician or a nurse practitioner, whoever it is, that this is what you were thinking of. You had read about this. Can they help you with this? This is what you have in mind. Are they comfortable supporting you and working with you on this? And if they're not, then they should tell you up front that I'm not experienced with this. I am not able to do this with you. In that case, it may be time to get a second opinion. Find healthcare providers whose treatment plan is in line with what you have in mind, because they do exist. It's just a matter of finding them.
Absolutely. And just to My Imaginations UK again, I had a similar experience with my doctor after I had lost a lot of weight. The doctor looked me right in the eye and said, you need to eat a hamburger. You've reached your goal weight. And I was just stunned. I wasn't even vegan at that point. I was just like, why would I put the same stuff in my hand that brought me here in the first place? That doesn't make a whole lick of sense to me. I never ate the hamburger, and I've never been healthier either. So kudos to you for following your gut. I personally am very proud of you. Dr. Rahman, before we wrap things up for the day, we got to open up the doctor's mailbag and field a question here. Remember, you can drop your question in the comment section now, or tweet them to us, or send them to us on Instagram using the hashtag ExamRoomPodcast. Now, today's question comes to us from Taryn. She says she's been feeling better since she began eating a plant-based diet, but she still has GI, a little bit of GERD, and some acid reflux. So her question is, what are some foods that I need to stay away from to decrease inflammation?
Yeah. So let's explain to our viewers who may not know. Heartburn is where acid that belongs in the stomach that helps us with digestion leaves the stomach and goes upwards into the esophagus. There's supposed to be a sphincter there that prevents this, but sometimes that sphincter may not work that well. So the acid makes its way into the esophagus. It causes a burning sensation. It can be quite uncomfortable. So there are several things. First, switching to a plant-based diet can absolutely help. We've seen this with innumerable patients where their GERD symptoms go down. GERD is another word for heartburn. The other thing is within plant-based foods, certain foods may trigger the acid reflux more. So avoiding things like caffeine, tea, coffee, chocolate, that could help. And then for some people, there are just certain specific foods that they know of if they consume a certain spice or certain ingredient that triggers it. So important to avoid that till things are under better control. And lastly, it's important to remember that there's physics playing a role in here. So we want the acid to not go upward. So after we eat, it's important to stay upright, sitting or standing, avoid reclining or laying down. That makes it much easier for gravity to pull the acid into the esophagus.
All right. Great information, Dr. Rahman. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chuck.
All right. If we didn't get to your question today, have no fear. There's a good chance we can get to it on a future show. We do save each and every one that comes in. So go ahead and keep on sending them in the comment section, or again, send them to us on social media using the hashtag #ExamRoomPodcast. Now, the doctors at the Barnard Medical Center are now doing telemedicine appointments with patients in Illinois, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. We're talking about 3 brand new states just added to the roster, and that comes right on the heels of the additions of Florida and Georgia. And of course, also, if you live in California, New York, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, Missouri, Arizona, Colorado, Massachusetts, and Kentucky, you can also make that appointment right now. Do it via telemedicine right on your own computer and right from the comfort of your own home. Make that appointment today, barnardmedical.org, 202-527-7500. Dr. Rahman would love to see you, work closely with you one-on-one. On tomorrow's show, it is, oh boy, this is a big one, Gut Health Q&A Day with the one and only Dr. Alan Desmond. He will be here talking all things happy gut. So if gut bacteria, if microbiome is your jam, tomorrow is your day. Get your questions ready and join us here back at noon Eastern right here on Facebook and on YouTube. Would love to see you. I have a sneaking suspicion that this is going to be a very popular episode. And a reminder, we are cooking up something special this Thursday, starting bright and early this Thursday. Mark your calendars. Early start time, 9 a.m. before the start of the International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine, before that gets underway. So let's have breakfast together. Let's get inspired. Let's get educated. And let's get ready for that conference that starts off just after the show goes off the air. So 9 a.m. Thursday start time. And there's also a new episode of the Exam Room podcast that is out today. It continues a conversation I had with Eric O'Gray. He was on the show last week talking about his experience with COVID-19. And so after these cameras stopped rolling, he and I continued to talk for another 20, 30 minutes, more about his experience. But what we really dove into a lot was his 97-year-old mother-in-law, Josephine. Okay, Josephine moved in with them, adopted a whole food plant-based diet. The doctors are so astounded because in a matter of weeks, Josephine goes from being largely sedentary to having all of her medications, getting off of them, and now she's even walking 2 to 3 miles every single day. And so when you think, I'm too old to change, I can never do this, my time has passed me, Josephine is 97 years old, off all of her medication, up and walking around 2 to 3 miles every single day. And so I would love for you to listen to that conversation that Eric and I had about this inspirational woman. Head over to Apple Podcast or Spotify or Stitcher, wherever shows are available. Look for the Exam Room podcast by the Physicians Committee. Hit that subscribe button and leave a 5-star rating. And the show in particular with this conversation is, can vegans get COVID-19? That is the main theme of the show. But in the second part of my conversation with Eric, the one that we taped exclusively for the podcast, that's where we talk about Josephine. And it is some of the most extraordinary talk you will ever hear anywhere today. I'm telling you, like, if you need a pick-me-up, like, this is it. 97 years old. Like, how great is that? All right. Lastly, there are so many kids in the kitchen, right? How cool is this? There are so many kids in the kitchen, and that event is kicking off tomorrow. Now, what is this? Well, kids are cooking, right? It's a handful of cooks in the kitchen, turning the cameras on their 8 to 11-year-old children as they share easy and fun plant-based cooking ideas, getting the kids started on healthy eating habits early in life, man, that can carry them with them well into adulthood. Josephine stumbled across it at 97. Maybe she can tune in and learn a new recipe or two. So the show kicks off tomorrow at 12:30 Eastern time, right after we wrap up here. But you need to head over to the So Many Cooks in the Kitchen Facebook page to tune in. So grab your kids, watch, eat some lunch, and learn together. And maybe, as the junior chefs are whipping up something great, you'll get an idea for what to have for dinner. Pretty cool. That is at 12:30 tomorrow. But for today, that is going to do it for us. My thanks again to Doctors Hana Kahleova and Vanita Rahman for joining us, and to the crew that makes the magic happen. Our director is Donna Steele, and our producer is Laura Anderson. On behalf of everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks so much for watching today. And until tomorrow, stay safe, take a stand, and keep it plant-based.